Welcome to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where we make investing fun, simple, and always real. Very excited to have a very special guest. We have Senator Phil Gramm with us, who spent, as most of you know, quite a bit of time in Congress, in the Senate, and on the banking committee, lots of legislation, and he's been very vocal lately about tariffs. We're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to talk about entitlements, income inequality. Lots to discuss that's very timely. A lot of people know who Senator Phil Gramm is. Spent time at Texas A&M teaching economics, so he has experience in academia, in government, and also in the private sector. Recently been doing a lot with AEI, so Senator Gramm, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. I'm very happy to be here. It's a very interesting and important time, that's for sure.
You know, you've authored a book, The Triumph of Economic Freedom, where the subtitle is Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. I know you've had a lot to talk about the disparity between, statistics of labor and also statistics of income, and there's a lot of disparity there. So we'll have a lot of ground to cover, that's for sure. But let's start here. Let's talk a little bit about our budget and our fiscal situation. I read 3 reports every year. I read the Congressional Budget Office report. I read the General Accountability Office report, the GAO, that's the Comptroller General of the United States, and then the Treasury as well. And almost without exception, the words they use concerning our fiscal path is the word unsustainable. It seems that the deficit is, I still feel young, but I remember back when Ross Perot came in and he had his little flip charts on TV and he was screaming about, the fiscal irresponsibility. He's a Texas guy as well. What is your feeling on the fiscal situation, particularly the off-balance sheet promises of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, what we might call it, they call it income stability now. That is the larger part of the budget. What's your feeling on our fiscal situation first?
Well, first of all, I was the author of the budget in the House, which was the most dramatic change in fiscal policy in my lifetime. I was the author of Gramm-Rudman, which was our effort to control the deficit. I think the deficit is a very real problem. Ronald Reagan once said to me, Phil, Cap Weinberger, who was Secretary of Defense, says your Gramm-Rudman is more dangerous than the Soviet Union. And I said, Mr. President, deep down in your heart, don't you think Washington spending is a greater threat to the future of America than the Soviet Union? And Reagan said, I better not answer that question. I'll get in trouble. So, yeah, look, our deficit is in the danger zone. We're running deficits now like a third world country. And so I guess the starting point is, where do you begin to gain control? And I think we got to do 2 things. One, we've got to come to grips with social welfare spending. Everybody talks about Social Security and what a threat it is in fiscal policy, but you need to remember the payroll tax on Social Security funds 90% of Social Security. The demands Social Security makes on general revenues are actually quite small, about $84 billion a year. Medicare is 50% funded by premiums. None of Medicaid is funded by premiums. So, and we have this problem, which I talk about in the book, which is that the Census Bureau, in measuring income, does not count 88% of the poverty program as income to the people who get the benefits. So when you look at the Social Security numbers, only about a third of the people getting Medicaid are poor. When you look at the numbers that include all the benefits you get, like food stamps, housing subsidies, and 100 other programs, only 3% of the people getting Medicaid are poor. And so if we can't cut Medicaid, and we can't basically say to the census, count all transfer payments as income, and then let's look and see who is eligible for all these welfare programs. If we can't do that, and we've got Republicans who foolishly, in my opinion, are talking about they're concerned about cutting Medicaid. I'm not talking about cutting Medicaid to poor people. In some states, you can get Medicaid with an income of $103,000 a year, and that's not counting the value of all the welfare benefits you're getting. So, and finally, Medicaid exploded under Obama and under Biden. So the first thing we've got to do is deal with social welfare spending. The second thing we've got to do is go back to the pre-Biden period and shear off the spending add-ons that occurred in the name of the pandemic. But the pandemic is over, and we need to go back and shear those programs off. And then we're going to have a sort of a come to Jesus meeting about Medicare and Social Security. Those are longer term problems. But anybody who doesn't want to cut spending, anybody that ultimately wants to raise taxes dramatically and keep on spending, is going to start the debate with Social Security.
Yeah.
But it's not the problem today. Medicaid, food stamps, housing subsidies, those are the problems.
Now, in your book, it talks about debunking the 7 great myths of American capitalism. Now, I consider myself a capitalist. I'm an entrepreneur. I love the idea that I can get up in the morning and pursue happiness. I don't get a guarantee at it, but I like to get up early and go to work. I'm one of those types of guys. But there is a bit of an attack on capitalism that I see prevalent, particularly since the pandemic, where people are going to turn to government to solve their problems. Now, I don't lean right or left. I'm a centrist. I stay out of that mess. I'm just trying to make it happen for my family and my customers. But I will tell you that it is interesting that I felt the timbre change a little bit, where people turn to government more to solve their problems than turn to themselves, as if the locus of control was external, particularly in the political climate. I ran a search for all of the presidential elections, and without exception, the rhetoric is the other guy's an existential threat to the Union every single time. All clear back to Jefferson. If Jefferson's president, it's an existential threat to the Union. But I would like to hear just one or two, give people a preview of your book. What are a couple of these myths concerning American capitalism, in your view?
Well, let me go back one step and make the point that if you ask Schumer and Thune, the two leaders of the Senate, where they stand on a host of issues, they would differ on almost everything. And so it's tempting to say they just have different philosophies. But if you ask them, what happened in the Industrial Revolution? What happened in the period of progressive regulation? What happened in the Depression? What happened in trade at the end of World War II? What happened in the financial crisis? And tell me what you think about poverty and about income inequality. Their perception of those problems, their fact set that determine how they see the world, would be totally different. Okay? And so, what we do in the book is after we explain that our view is very much, our view on issues is very much determined by our own experience. I'll give you an example. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. My brother was the first person in my extended family to ever graduate from high school. So if you're going to convince me that the system is fixed and there's no opportunity, you're going to get up mighty early in the morning, okay? It just is not possible to convince me of that because of my experience. So, and the same is true about our views on all these other issues. So what we do is take these 5 historical examples and the 2 current dominant problems, and we present a simple statement of what the facts are that nobody disputes. And then what we consider to be the myth, giving it full presentation and all of the facts and figures it cites. And then we set about debunking the myth. And basically the question is, in all of these, in each of these issues, conventional wisdom has led to more government control. And we're arguing that if you really look at the facts, it argues for less government control and more freedom. And by the way, if you're getting up early in the morning to go to work to try to be happy, you're probably going to be happy. But the people that are getting up in the morning and taking dope and watching television all day, they're not going to be happy. And so I'm one of those programs to help them, not just save money.
You know, it is interesting. Regulation is always a headache for the entrepreneur because we just want to go out and get things done. There's certainly regulation doesn't lubricate business. It creates friction with it. But at the same time, it's been proven time and again, I've seen it in business, that greed will absolutely let people misbehave. They don't always act ethically. They don't always do the right thing. What amount of regulation is, how do you balance that? Because I also want to be protected from people that are going to abuse the system of capitalism, and that happens every single time, without question. So how do you balance the idea of the freedom to do business, but to handle the bad apples that will always abuse those freedoms?
Well, you have laws on fraud and abuse. You focus antitrust on consumer benefit. If what a company is doing is hurting the consumer, then there's an antitrust violation if the company is controlling markets or controlling prices. The problem is now that antitrust law, which to begin with just gave government a license to do anything, is moving back in that direction. And don't forget, there's no doubt, as Alexander Hamilton said at the beginning of the debate in American government, that everything man makes is tainted by the fact that man is self-interested. But when you talk about corruption, you've got to also look at government. Do you want to give government all this power, given that it is run by the same people with the same motivation for their own self-interest? So it's a trade-off between the rule of law and set guidelines that you just don't make up as you go, like our trade policy today, and you limit the power of government in the process. I don't want business to have the power to abuse people or to fix prices, but I don't want government to be able to do the same thing either. I want the market to do it, and a competitive market.
I would really like less government, in my opinion. I don't think there's any government program that could have the horsepower to compensate for a poor personal policy. If people don't have education, if people don't have work ethic, if people don't understand risk and how to manage it, the government can't save them. And the opposite is true too. There's not a government policy that's so bad that you can't keep a good man down. Let's talk a little bit about tariffs for a minute. And this is where, often when I get on my podcast, I'm confident. If we're going to talk about investing, I'm pretty confident. I've done it for many years, but tariffs are new territory for me. Personally, I got to go into learning mode here. So I'm part of the reason I'm so grateful to have you on the program is you can teach us a little bit more about this. I like free trade. I think the more you've got companies the ability to make different components of different things in several countries, let those efficiencies work. That drives prices down. That drives for the consumer. It drives profits up for businesses. If you have lower prices and more profits, that seems nice to me. We saw that in COVID. When we became more localized and globalized, we saw inflation in two ways. First, it costs more to make stuff here at home because you don't get to shop around for cheap labor, but also the amount of money we infused in the economy. So it was a double whammy for inflation. But tell me about tariffs. Tell me what you know about tariffs. And when you look at the fiscal problems, you could tax, you could stop spending, you could grow the economy, you could try to do all three. But the idea of a tariff to say, well, instead of taxing our people, we'll tax other countries, certainly those expenses are just going to get passed on.
Well,
and one more thing, if I'm in China, I'm just going to create plants in other countries and finally ship it from another country. I'm going to circumvent that anyway. So the floor is yours, Senator. Tell us about tariffs.
First of all, tariffs fall on American consumers, not on foreigners. That's a myth. Secondly, at its root, a protective tariff is an effort to benefit a few people at the expense of the many. And let me just give you an example. Americans pay twice the world price for sugar because of the American Sugar Program that pays vast amounts of money to roughly 4,300 sugar producers. Now, what gives government the right to take food out of children's mouths to pay off 4,300 producers? If they can't produce sugar in America competitively, let them go on and do something else. Secondly, how can you be better off making something yourself when it's more expensive for you to make it than it is for you to buy it? I have my trade with Walmart. I've lived out in the country now for 22 years, and I buy from Walmart. Okay, I love Walmart. Done more for working people than all the government programs combined. Okay, so my trade balance with Walmart is I have spent probably tens of thousands of dollars with Walmart, maybe hundreds of thousands. They never bought anything from me. They never bought anything from me. I'm being ripped off by Walmart. Well, why am I buying from Walmart? Because it's cheaper and better, and it makes me better off. If that's being ripped off, rip me off. But this whole argument about protectionism is really, the president cannot get his head around the fact that having a trade deficit with another country simply means we're buying more from them than we're selling them. But that in no way means we're worse off. We voluntarily bought it from them. They voluntarily sold it to us. And many of these countries, like Britain and Holland, are major investors in the United States. So the president wants companies to invest here, but when they invest here, they have to have dollars to invest. And when they spend these tens of billions of dollars, they drive up the demand for dollars. The value of the dollar goes up. And in the process, it encourages Americans to buy more foreign goods because it makes them cheaper. So these tariffs are basically tearing up the supply chains of American businesses that have been built over the last 50 years. Our trading system built the modern world in which we are the richest, freest people on earth. And we tear it up at our own peril. And I don't understand this. A reciprocal tariff is where I say, okay, look, I've got all these areas where I'm not really opening my market. You've got all these areas you aren't. Let's get together and just eliminate them. We get rid of our sugar program. We get rid of dairy protections. We get rid of the Jones Act, where foreigners can't ship goods between states. And they do the same thing. But that's not what the president is doing. What the president is doing is he's saying to these countries, some of whom we have a surplus with, which is supposed to be we're ripping them off, which obviously we aren't. What I see is the president saying not that we'll reduce our tariffs and trade barriers, you reduce yours, but we want you to commit to buy American goods. Well, in a free country, government can't make me buy foreign goods, or at least they're not supposed to. So this is a very dangerous policy, and it's going to drive up cost. It's going to create inefficiency. And the final point, the number of people involved that are employed in manufacturing as a percentage of total employment has been declining for 75 years. Just like the number of people in agriculture declined in the 20th century from 50% to 2%. And yet we're producing more and better products than we ever produced. Why? Because of technology. So when President Trump is talking about bringing back all this manufacturing, who wants those jobs? 43% of American businesses in the National Federation of Independent Business questionnaire can't fill the jobs in manufacturing we've got now. My mama, who worked in a cotton mill, spent 20 years of her life eliminating two jobs in that cotton mill, my job and my brother's job, by prodding us through high school and through college. And because she saw that the future was in high-skilled areas that we now call services. And the final point, and I'll stop the sermon, a lot of our problems in terms of, quote, the decline in manufacturing. We're producing more than we've ever produced. Labor productivity is higher than it's ever been in manufacturing. But part of the reason these numbers have come down dramatically is we made a decision to define programming as a service. When you buy a car, a lot of the money you're paying is for all those gadgets on the car, which are made by subcontractors. And none of those jobs in programming are classified as manufacturing. So you may be paying 40% of the cost of a new Ford pickup, may be the gadgets that come from programming, but none of that counts in the Bureau of Labor Statistics measure as manufacturing jobs. So, some of this is just the way we define things.
I think. And we evolve. I mean, we used to be an agricultural nation. My grandfather grew up in agriculture. My dad was more of a manufacturing, and now we have communications technology. So I think we actually produce more food than we did back then with less people in the food. We actually produce a lot of stuff with less people in the factory. So I don't know that we want to go backwards, and I can't disagree with that. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the triumph of economic freedom, debunking the 7 great myths of American capitalism. We're here with Senator Phil Gramm. We'll be back in a moment.
They make different topics that could be complex very simple. You're going to learn at your own pace. The more that you want to learn, the more you can learn. It's been amazing for me personally, as well as me taking the subject matter and teaching it to my children. They're all very passionate about what it is they're teaching and how they teach it, and it just comes across as so genuine. If it's something that you're interested in, then certainly they're the best teachers that I've run across in terms of teaching fiscal education.
Welcome back to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where we make investing fun, simple, and real. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like, and hit the notification bell. And also drop by yourinvestingclass.com for free resources. We're here with Senator Phil Gramm, the triumph of economic freedom, debunking the 7 great myths of American capitalism. I'd like to put you in the hot seat a little bit, Senator, about how legislation works. One of the things I've been a big critic of is 401k legislation. And a lot of people don't know the history of how this happens. And so I'm going to share it with you. You're probably familiar with it because you've been around the block, but there's an overarching law of unintended consequences. When the Studebaker Company went bankrupt, and so many people lost their pensions, they began to cry to President Kennedy saying, hey, what can you do? We have all these pensions lost. And he didn't do much with it, and Johnson didn't do much with it, and Nixon said, I'm not a crook, but he kind of was. And then it wound up in President Ford's lap where we had ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And we invented the PBGC, which is very difficult. Their fiscal situation isn't good. And there was a couple of companies in upstate New York, Xerox and Eastman Kodak, and they went to Senator Barbara Conable and said, hey, we're in a 70% marginal tax rate here. When we get a big bonus, 70% of that goes to the government. Can you help us out here? At this point, Jimmy Carter is in a really rough presidency. He's had bad energy. You have Iran hostages. He's really struggling. He tries to do tax reform. And Congressman Barbara Conable hires Richard Stenger, a lawyer out of Temple University, to write Section 401k as a favor to these buddies of his at Xerox and Kodak. The original Section 401k was 800 words. Now, the Affordable Care Act is probably 5,000 pages, but the original 401k was 800 words, and it was enacted in 1978. In 1981, benefits consultant Ted Benna used that law, kind of an off-label use of the law, was never designed to shoulder the burden of retirement, And he used that law to fund the first 401k program, and he dangled an employee match to get people to participate. Well, Congressman Barbara Conable wrote a book 10 years after he'd retired from Congress called Congress and the Income Tax. I'm sure that's going to be a page turner. We all want to curl up by the fire tonight and listen to all his speeches. And there's not one mention of Section 401k in his book. 20 years after the fact, when we had trillions of dollars in the 401k program, he was surprised when his colleagues congratulated him for being nominated by Pension Investments magazine as the man of the century for having done such a thing. He says, I didn't do this. He calls up the Ways and Means Committee, which he chaired. He said, did I have anything to do with 401k? He says, oh, yes, sir. Yes, Congressman. Yes, you did. You sponsored it. And now we have $11 trillion in 401ks. They've erased pensions. And the most resultant legislation of his career, he had no idea it even happened until 20 years after the fact. I guess that story underscores how someone tweaks legislation without any idea of where it's going to go and what it's going to do. In your experience, both academically as an economics professor and also as a senator, how can we be sure that the guys up there on the hill knowing what the heck they're doing? There's no credentials to be a senator other than to get votes. How can we as American people feel confident in our government that they'll make decisions, not just doing a couple of favors for Xerox and Kodak?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that special interests end up adding features to bills, and it's a constant problem. And I think the defense against it is people who pay attention, who, when in doubt, throw those things out. And there, obviously, people want to pass legislation, and because it's something they can go home and say. I often was more proud of the legislation I stopped than the legislation passed. I sort of had the old Barry Goldberg view that repealing old laws is often better than passing new laws. But you'll see in the tax bill we're getting ready to do, we've got all kinds of ideas that make absolutely no sense. If tips are going to be tax-free or bonus is going to be tax-free, should my Social Security be tax-free? I don't think so. And now you've got some Republicans that are talking about raising tax rates, and the tax rate will fall directly on small business because small businesses are taxed as individuals under subchapter S and under partnerships, proprietorships. You're probably taxed as an individual. And so when you raise tax rates, there are actually Republicans that are talking about raising taxes on small business to fund tax giveaways that make no sense. And a third of the tax cut is going to reduce the alternative minimum tax, which is paid by a tiny percentage of the taxpayers. So sometimes the priorities of these things don't make any sense to me. Now, I'm not there, and there's a real temptation, Andy, you need to understand, when you leave, there's a temptation to say, well, things went to hell when I left. And so since I'm not there, I try not to stand in judgment on my colleagues. But the last thing in the world Republicans need to be doing is raising marginal income taxes on small business. And if you raise the top rate from 37 to 39.6 or 8, whichever it is, it's going to fall directly on small business. And I'm adamantly opposed to it.
Well, it's an interesting time. I've in my lifetime, I've been perhaps become more jaded as I've watched the two parties battle and fight. I felt bad. My son turned 18 last year, so it was his first opportunity to vote. And he came to me and says, "Dad, are you serious? These are my choices. This is what I got." And I said, "Son, I don't know that the fiscal irresponsibility of the United States is fixable. I don't know that the monetary policy, which in 2007 changed drastically in the powers they got granted themselves. My call for people really is to prepare as individuals, because if people think they can vote their way out of this problem and what we're facing, I'm not sure that they can. The attitude I've taken, and maybe you can correct me, my jadedness, but the attitude I've taken is I think there's a storm coming. I think there's a lot of opportunity with AI economically. I think there's potential growth there. But I look at the fiscal irresponsibility of the United States. I see how we're wielding the power to just tariff this and tariff that. Obviously, it's affected the markets, which is a very small portion, actually. There's a lot of non-listed private companies that are getting hurt by this that the stock market will not reflect. My call is for people to get educated. Yes, sir. Get educated yourself and prepare for these storms yourself. Don't rely on government to solve these, because I don't think they can or will. In my lifetime, I've seen deficits grow. I've seen debt ceilings go higher. I've seen entitlements get bigger. I don't see Democrats or Republicans doing anything to change that trend.
Well, as of right now, there are a few Republicans in the House and a few in the Senate that want to do something about spending. Other than them, I don't see anybody else in government. I don't see any semblance of concern among Democrats for spending. Our problem is spending, not revenues. There's going to be a come to Jesus moment here.
I agree.
I think we should all do the best we can to strengthen our own sustainability. But I'm skeptical about everything except America. I'm very skeptical of government. I went to Washington not liking government, and I left liking it less than I went with. And it's not that they're not good people in government. There are many good people in government. But its government is doing a lot of things it ought not to be doing. And whether they're doing it well or poorly is not the point. But I'm not skeptical about the ability of America, when it has to act, to do it. I saw it happen in my lifetime with Ronald Reagan. I'm proud of the fact that I was a little stormtrooper in the Reagan Revolution. And I think it can and will happen again, but it's not going to happen until there's a real problem that's undeniable. And the sooner we recognize it and start on it, the easier it's going to be to fix. Now, if you were running America as a business, okay, you could fix this problem almost instantaneously. by just making some hard choices. But it's not being run as a business. And, I think at some point, America will rise up and deal with these problems. So I'm very skeptical about everything except America. I'm not skeptical about America.
I love it. Well, I'm grateful that I get to be in this country, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that people have provided for me, for sure. Pick up a copy of The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. I think it's essential for, as an education advocate.
What it's going to look like. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah, let's see. There you have it.
It'll be out, I think, on the 13th of May.
Well, and that's right around the corner.
My last book won the Hayek Prize, and so I'm hoping this one will be even more successful. And why you should read it, it's not going to change my life whether you buy it or not, but it'll change America's life if you read it. Because it basically gives you the information you need to know in understanding that government is not the answer here. Freedom is the answer. People working to help their family and provide for their future, if we can provide a stable environment for them to do it, the sort of desire of people to get ahead, the reason that people by the millions want to come to America. That force can solve every problem we got if we let it do it. But you got to provide a good environment to do it. So read the book. I don't care if you buy one copy and pass it around to 1,000 people. If they read it, that's what I want. Andy, it's been great talking to you.
I really appreciate it, Senator. I'm always trying to look to learn and encourage my listeners to learn. Capitalism has worked very, very well for a long, long time. It's produced an environment that's lifted every single boat, even in my lifetime. And so I'm a huge fan of preserving capitalism and teaching people about it and getting them excited about the opportunities that are out there for us. So again, pick up a copy of The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. And just again, Senator, thank you so much for your time and for your experience, your insight. And hopefully we can have you back when big things happen and you can continue to give us insight of a guy that was on the inside for a long, long time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
And if you would, hang on just a bit after I close the show so I can properly thank you. You've been listening and watching the Cashflow Academy podcast. We make investing fun, simple, and real. We've been speaking today with Senator Phil Gramm and talking about his new book, The Triumph of Economic Freedom, Debunking the 7 Great Myths of American Capitalism. Also drop by yourinvestingclass.com for resources that are free in learning how to better invest and take control of your own financial blueprint. If you enjoyed our conversation, like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.